All right, today we're going to take a look at the Middle Kingdom period of ancient Egypt. Um, the Old Kingdom was the time period of pyramids and a lot of the accomplishments we tend to think of with ancient Egypt, but really the Middle Kingdom period was a time of growth, especially economically within Egypt. So let's take a look at ancient Egypt during the Middle Kingdom. First, again, as a review, looking at the geography of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt was a kingdom surrounded by desert. The ancient Egyptians referred to the desert as red lands, and these provided natural barriers to invasion. So they got to develop their culture relatively unabated until the end of the Middle Kingdom, which we'll get into later. The land surrounding the Nile River were referred to as Kemet, or the Black Lands. The predictable floods that happened biannually in Egypt created farmland that the Egyptians could farm and build a civilization on. The Egyptian civilization, let me rephrase that. Ancient Egypt was also bracketed by two seas, the Red Sea to the east and the Mediterranean Sea to the north. Again, this allowed ancient Egypt to develop in relative isolation. Now, ancient Egypt had separated into Upper and Lower Egypt, and as reviewed during the Old Kingdom period, King Menes united Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt and declared himself Pharaoh. Literally, it means the great house. The great house is where the king lived. So the place where he lived also became the name of him, the Pharaoh, or the great house. People began to use hieroglyphics during the Archaic period and use irrigation ditches, which allowed Egyptian civilization to thrive. As a reminder, the 5 major periods of Egyptian history: you have the Archaic period that ended when King Menes united Upper and Lower Egypt. The Old Kingdom period, that was a time period that pyramids were built. The Middle Kingdom period, which we're going to look into today. The New Kingdom period, and then the outside rule period. The last pharaoh of that period would be Cleopatra, and that would represent the end of ancient Egypt as we know it. Again, just a quick look at a map. There are a couple things that I want to point out. If you look at Jerusalem, we've already studied the ancient Israelites, and the Israelites were neighbors of the Egyptians. I want to point that out. Also, if you look at the map, you see Byblos, Byblos. Byblos was the capital of the Phoenicians. And so the Phoenicians, for example, gave us our alphabet. They were neighbors of the Egyptians as well. To the south, you'll see the kingdom of Nubia and the kingdom of Cush. These were neighbors of the Egyptians to the south, and to the west, specifically northwest, along the northern coast of Africa, you had a group of people that are basically known as the Libyans. Just a quick review of the Old Kingdom. Pyramids were built during the Old Kingdom period, and the pyramid you are seeing from Saqqara was constructed between 2630 BC to 2611 BC. It was constructed for the pharaoh Djoser, Djoser. And what makes this really significant? It's the first pyramid built in ancient Egypt. Before this time period, the Egyptian kings were buried in mastabas, which were basically, if you can envision just one of those steps on a step pyramid, that's what a mastaba was. Well, basically, a step pyramid was the next step towards pyramid making. They built a bigger mastaba, and then on top of that, they built a smaller mastaba, and then on top of that, a smaller mastaba, a smaller mastaba, and a smaller mastaba. They will eventually smooth the edges, but before they started smoothing the edges, these pyramids were called the step pyramids. Imhotep is credited with inventing the pyramid in ancient Egypt. Pharaoh was considered a child of the sun god Ra, and Pharaoh's chief subordinates were priests. Pharaoh was the chief priest, and he was believed to enjoy eternal life. The governors reported to the pharaoh and his chief bureaucratic official, the vizier. The Old Kingdom was a period of great peace. Pharaoh had no standing army. Each local area had its own militia, so each noble in time of attack would donate some of his soldiers to the cause, and the pyramids were constructed during the Old Kingdom period only. Here is the Great Pyramids at Giza. And you guys learned in a video that what the three smaller pyramids were. They were for the queens of Khufu. The Old Kingdom period fell about 2200 BC due to financial problems in the construction of the pyramids and crop failures that were happening during that time period. It would be followed by something called the First Intermediate Period. It was a period of chaos, basically, where the nobles were warring against each other. Nobles are rich landowners. Pyramids, tombs, statues, and temples were looted and destroyed. And so that's why most of the stuff that was in the pyramids, we don't exactly know what was in it. We know what the hieroglyphics said on the walls, but we don't know exactly what was in it in each of these pyramids. However, there were some things hidden away that we have discovered. The First Intermediate Period would end around the year 2050 BC, and Egypt would reunify under a man named Mentuhotep II. Mentuhotep was, during the First Intermediate Period, I want to backtrack a little, Egypt split back up into two Egypts. You had Lower Egypt again and Upper Egypt again during the 11th and 12th dynasty. But a powerful leader named Mentuhotep would become king of southern Egypt, and he would launch an attack on the north and eventually reunite Egypt under one rule. And this began the Middle Kingdom period. Mentuhotep would eventually be ruling Egypt for 51 years. The Middle Kingdom was, ironically, when Egypt was reunified, it was done so by the pharaoh aligning himself with the middle class. So the nobility, the rich landowners, were kept in check because the pharaoh made an alliance with the social class below the nobles, which happened to outnumber the nobles. During this time period, Egypt expanded, especially to the south, and they conquered the Nubians. Nubia would be in basically what's the northern part of Sudan today, along the Nile River. Emphasis changed on public works rather than just pyramids. So pyramids were generally not built during the Middle Kingdom. They instead focused on the construction of temples, and the construction period was during the flood period. So it was a public works program. It was a way to keep people employed, especially the farming class, during a time period when they could not work. Religion became democratized. the hope of salvation came to common people. What do I mean by salvation? Well, I mean eternal life. So it was no longer just Pharaoh who could live forever, but you're going to have something called the Book of the Dead that comes into vogue. And with the Book of the Dead, if your soul was weighed against the feather of Ma'at and you were found righteous, you got to enter into the afterlife as well. So Pharaoh was not the only avenue into the afterlife. However, he was still viewed as a god and possessing full Ma'at. Trade increases with Syria and Mesopotamia during this time period, especially the Assyrians. Around 2040 BC, a new dynasty of powerful pharaohs. We mentioned that. Here are several key differences. During the Middle Kingdom, pharaohs shared power with other officials. Yes, Pharaoh had Ma'at, but the real rule laid with the bureaucracy during this time period. Pharaoh became more of a figurehead. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't rule when he didn't make decisions. He did, but his decisions were lessened, and the bureaucrats basically took care of everything that wasn't a big deal, because Pharaoh was a god. So he didn't need to be bothered with the problems of this world very often, only the ones that they didn't have a solution for. Pharaoh got to spend more of his time with pleasurable pursuits and religious symbolism. People of the Middle Kingdom mummified everyone, not just pharaohs and high nobility. And pharaohs were not buried in pyramids in the Middle Kingdom. Pyramids were only built during the Old Kingdom period. So important to point that out. Okay. Mentuhotep II moved and built a new capital city when he unified Egypt. Basically, in the very northern part of the Upper Kingdom. This centralized location represented a unification of the two kingdoms, and that city became the city of Thebes. Now, one of the things you're going to have to understand as time goes on is the capital of Egypt will move about some. And again, we're talking about a country, let me rephrase it, we're talking about a civilization that lasted thousands of years. So when we read about this and look back on it, it seems like they're moving the capital all the time. But the capital will remain in the same place for 500, 600, 700 years at a time. That's not moving very fast. It seems fast to us as we look backwards through 3,000 to 4,000 years worth of time. Understand that. To give you an example, Washington, D.C. has been the capital of the United States for about 220 years, give or take. Okay? So the capital would be moved to Thebes. Even after Thebes was no longer the capital during the New Kingdom period, it would still be a religious center. And the other side of the river from Thebes was the Valley of the Kings. And that's where New Kingdom kings were buried, like King Tut, which we'll talk about later. But that's during the New Kingdom. But Thebes was built during the Middle Kingdom and would become a religious center after. The arts are going to play a very important role in ancient Egypt, and we will be doing an art project next week. Just letting you know, it's coming. But the arts of ancient Egypt continued to develop during the Middle Kingdom period, and there was a type of sculpture called a block statue that became popular during this time period. It would basically be carved from a single piece of rock. It kind of had this squarish look to it. It showed a man squatting with his arms folded on top of his knees. Writing and literature also developed as well. And for the first time in ancient Egyptian history, writing was used for entertainment including writing stories and recording religious philosophy. So you begin to have fictional writing during the Middle Kingdom, which you didn't see during the Old Kingdom and the Archaic periods. The ancient Egyptians believed that the heart was the seat of the soul, and during the Middle Kingdom, the ancient Egyptians mummified all of the dead for the afterlife, all of them. Interesting facts about mummification: the brain was taken out through the nose. Embalmers did not want to damage the face, so they were very careful. Masks were placed over the heads of the mummies to ensure that spirits could recognize their bodies, because the Ka and the Ba had to unite. And natron, a kind of salt, is used to dry out the body and preserve it. The mummification process started by washing the dead corpse and shaving it. Now, the shaving was very important because the hair can hold on to liquid. The next thing was the brain was removed, and it was removed through the nose, and then the body was completely drained of its blood. Now, there's a reason for that. Blood is a liquid, and liquid allowed the microbes in the body to basically eat the body. When you're smelling a dead corpse, you're literally smelling the rotting caused by microbes decomposing the body or eating the body. Next, all the wet organs were removed, like the liver and the bowels and the lungs. Again, they're wet, so they need removed. The organs would be dried and put in canopic jars. These canopic jars would house all the important organs. Then they would add spices and alcohol to the body. Alcohol basically is a drying agent. And then they would dry the body using a salt called natron. The body would then be stuffed, again, with things to absorb the water, so that the water, the body would not decompose. And then it would be wrapped in linens, and then they would bury the body they would basically put the body in a coffin, and then the coffin would be placed inside a sarcophagus. The sarcophagus would be painted so that the Ka could recognize the Ba, enter into it to re-energize for its life in the afterlife. All right, I'm not going to read this. I'm going to ask you to pause this video right here, and I want you to read this about the chemistry of mummification. I'm not going to pretend like I'm a science teacher, but you know what? You have science teachers that you know. I want you to ask your science teachers about this slide. So pause, read it. Okay, I'm assuming you did what I told you and you paused and read the slide. The people of the Middle Kingdom did not bury their pharaohs in pyramids. That only happened during the Old Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom is often considered a golden age of Egypt. The Middle Kingdom basically was weakened towards the end of its period because nobles began revolting against the middle class and the pharaoh. See, there was a class below the middle class, and that would be the farming class and the slave class. And the nobles used those classes to garner soldiers for themselves. And the end of the Middle Kingdom period became a time of chaos. And during this weakened time, Egypt would be conquered from the outside for the first time by a group of people known as the Hyksos. The Hyksos introduced new things to warfare that the Egyptians were not prepared for, namely horse-drawn chariots, the use of bronze, and other new weapons as well, like the bow, the compound bow, not just a bow and arrow, but a compound bow. With the Hyksos invasion in 1630 BC, the Middle Kingdom ended. The Hyksos were nomads from Southwest Asia. They had superior weapons, and that's how they were able to conquer the Egyptians. And the Hyksos also had the ability to use iron, so they had superior technology. All right, I hope you took notes and paid attention, and I want you guys to have a wonderful day, and I'll see you tomorrow.